which the applicant conducted, Zoom conferences essentially. And then in addition to that, there were 2 on-site meetings with the applicant and with Tom Drzowski from staff. So 4 that I'm aware of.
How many local residents attended those meetings to understand exactly what the church was trying to do?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, on the town hall meetings, there were a number of people from the surrounding area. I'd say it was somewhere between 10 and 20, but I couldn't be exact, who also participated in those meetings. The on-site meetings with the church for the purpose of identifying visibility issues, locations of the sign, and the like, were attended by design only by the working group representatives, Fred, Bill Reed, and myself, together with Tom Drzowski from staff, and then Pastor John Stone and Mike Addis. So it was a limited group for that purpose. However, the working group communicated the results of all of those meetings with everybody who had sent in letters after the initial advertisement and hearing that was scheduled in July. Is that responsive to your question?
Yes. To some degree, it sounds like there's only 3 people that are against this. But I guess you're representing other people. That's fine. That's fine. As long as the communication is going out to the neighborhood, that's good. All right, Mr. Addis, if you're still on the line, would you like to make comments to support your position, please?
Yes. So, again, to recap, the church suffers from identification, and I think that's clear. And I think that if you've driven the site, that is the best example of what we're trying to accomplish. If you've driven the site during the day, you know what some of the problems are. If you've driven the site at night, you know what some of the problems are. The sign that's located on Skyline is approximately at the beginning of the turn, which is the left-hand turn in order to turn onto Orange Grove. It's right at that point. And so that sign positionally, I think, is in a good spot to anticipate the turn for Orange Grove. The sign at the corner of Orange Grove at the entrance is very critical because getting into the parking lot is very difficult. The sign that's on the building, we have requested a specific for the square footage on that sign at 47, and we have requested in our latest request the specific of the square footage that is on the sign that is on the east side of the building. We are very close to what is code compliant, and yes, there have been discussions that potentially were so close that we would pull the variance, and that was alluded to by several individuals. We hope that the board will look at this and will look at the request and say this is not outlandish, this is very reasonable, and would grant the variance as presented in the package that you have before you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. At this point in time, I would ask that we have a motion to close the public hearing. Can I have a motion from one of the board members, please.
This is Bruce Call. I move to close the public hearing.
This is Kelly. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. May I have a roll call vote for that, please, to close the public hearing?
Carroll,
Approve.
Hall,
Approve.
Green,
Approve.
Maslin,
Approve.
Wildblood.
Approve. All right, so now, excuse me, the public hearing is closed. So the board members, I'm going to ask you to give a little discussion and talk amongst ourselves as to what this is what's going on here. So I'll start it off with Mr. Carroll. If you have any discussion that you would like to bring up, please.
Not this one.
All right. Mr. Call?
Okay, there are a couple of things that I find to be compelling and important. One is, as it was pointed out, that the sign along Skyline is located so as to prepare those going west on Skyline and preparing to turn to the southwest. That gives them room at that gore point to be able to have notice to get into the turn lane to make the turn. So I think that having a sign there for anyone coming along from the east on Skyline, I think that's an important item, because I have driven that many times and it is easy to miss that turn. Second, the sign over on Orange Grove seems like that it is also an important location for the sign. So I'm generally on board with the idea of those two independent signs and their location. I have a concern, as I voiced already, about the intensity of the light. I like the idea of there being lighting there that's going to be clear and safe for people picking up their families, children, or other as the night gets on without it going too late. So even though they could be up till 11 and they are looking to shut down their signage at 10, I think that's as well as their activities, I think that's actually a positive thing. So, and maybe even a viable trade-off for potentially having slightly taller signs, even though the size of the lighted sign on those freestanding signs is compliant. So, to me, there's potentially a trade-off there.
Bruce, have you read the compromise that Tom had put through with the various conditions? Have you got that?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. I've got that in front of me.
You know, it's my personal opinion that there has been... I've been on this board for a number of years. I have never seen an issue go so long and be so compromised from the original. And that when I hear Mike say that, you know, they're very close to not even requiring a variance on all of this, it kind of wakes me up to say, yes, it's nice to be able to compromise as much as you possibly can and listen to all the concerns of the neighborhood. I think that's very important. And between Fred and Frank and Bill, they've made a nice case as to what they think should happen. However, on the other side, you have the church wanting to go this way and that way. I think those conditions that Tom and staff has put together has been very, very well thought out, and I really approve of the negotiations, the push and the shove, and that has been going on now for almost 6 months. But as far as getting into the minutia of the lighting, and can it be dimmed and can it not, I think if you look at what the specs are, whether it be the temperature of 4,400 and the neighborhood wants it considerably less, they want it like 3,000. I don't know what that definition is in the sunlight or in the dark, and that's what your concern is. Is that correct?
Well, that is not so much my concern, because you can have, like I said earlier, you can have an 8-watt 3000 K light and an 8-watt 44 K light, and the only noticeable difference is slight difference in intensity, very slight, but the real noticeable difference is the 3000 is much yellower than the 44, which is much whiter. So the temperature is not as big a concern to me as the intensity. And I have driven by some locations, a really harsh, intense light, even coming from a small area, can be very disconcerting. And so that's my concern. That's why I was suggesting the dimming, because I know that LEDs are generally dimmable, and I have to say, I'm personally an owner of a sign in a very distant other location, not in Tucson, and so I'm somewhat familiar with the specifics and maybe even the weeds of these kinds of things. So that's why I have a concern about the overall intensity of those individual lights at the freestanding locations, and I'd like if they could be dimmed so that they're comfortable. I mean, maybe what they're proposing is comfortable, but if they're not, it ought to be able to be dimmed. And then my only other concern was on the building itself. I am not a real fan of halo lighting because I think it makes it hard to read. And I was wondering if perhaps individual lighted letters of the 19-inch height might be actually easier to read than the halo lighting. That's a question that Mike would potentially address, but that's kind of my thinking on it. I think I'm generally in favor of the freestanding signs. I think the extra foot or two of height, given what's in that area and that it's kind of down in a hole, that doesn't bother me at all. What bothers me, I think, is more the potential for the intensity, and then that's the only concern that I have.
Well, as far as the height, recommendation by staff, conditional representation is to reduce that maximum height to 7 feet.
Yeah, and I agree with the staff's approach on that. I think the trade-off is actually a reasonable trade-off also for the timing of the light, and so I thought that was a reasonable trade-off to make this work. The question has been raised about hardship. I believe that there is real hardship when an existing facility is there and it is difficult for people to get in. It is not reasonable to assume that the building should be somehow torn down and relocated. So I believe that there is hardship based on the code, and so I take issue with the notion that there is no hardship here.
I would agree with you on that. So, Mr. Green, do you have any comment, or Kelly?
Yes. Lots and lots. Thank you. So I would be very interested, having worked with county staff on this dark skies very alternative, as to what the sticking points are now for actually going that route. I recognize that things started very far apart and that it's been because of the persistent effort of staff, of the church, of Mike Addis trying to represent his client that you've come this far. But now there are, just a few custom tunings requiring a variance as opposed to adherence to a really good piece of code that would accomplish all these goals, as was pointed out. And so I'd like to hear the strong arguments for why the extra 6 inches is, we're now down to talking about things like that, or the total signage square footage, because then they're allowed much bigger signs. It would address neighborhood concerns about the intensity of the light. And that's why I was talking with Mike Addis, because box signs are very hard to predict in terms of how bright they're going to come out with the light shining through. So there, with this idea that maybe the internal light is trimmable with a dimmer or something that goes two ways, so they can set it at the output consistent with the code. I find that all a very interesting prospect at this point, and want to know whether that's a viable prospect. My only other comment is that I heard today relatively compelling arguments for why this is a safety and visibility issue. They don't actually appear quite in that form in any of the application material that we've seen. And so, I really would hope that in future applicants can take seriously the notion of addressing this question of hardship for their operation in some fashion in order to justify considering the variance in the first place. So those are my thoughts on this, but it is a very interesting question as to whether they couldn't just go now with the code as it stands, because it gives them almost everything that's in this request.
I would tend to agree with you from a standpoint that they're so close to being right on anyway. It just kind of amazes me. But when you look at the aspect about, as Mr. Call said, coming from the east to turn left onto Orange Grove, that's got to be a help, having that sign there. The Orange Grove,
absolutely. But it is consistent, right? It's consistent with the new dark sky incentive code, and the only question we're talking about a half a foot variance in the height, whether they really need the full 8 feet or whether being 7.5 feet up and fully compliant with existing code would be sufficient.
Well, that's one side, and then the other side is the Orange Grove sign. When you look at that sign compared to the sign for the school just down the way, that sign is lit up. It's 20 feet in the air. What do we do with that sign? So you have to look at the neighborhood, and I fully appreciate what the neighbors are saying, but in reality, we have to look at what other areas of District 1 has done, what other areas and what the current code is, what Tom and his staff have got going. It just seems like this kind of fits in the mold, but there are some questions about brightness that I think are well deserved, and if we look at the conditions that staff has put together, I think things are reasonable, and that's what we have to be. We have to be reasonable, not only for the applicant but for the residents. And I understand the dark sky aspect, and this fits very close to it. The only thing that looks out of whack a little bit is the temperature on the monuments, but I don't even think that's too far out, if it is at all. But Tom could probably answer that too. So, Kelly, do you have any comments that you'd like to put in?
I just want to say that, I want to thank both sides and resolve this issue. The applicant is very close to not needing a variance, and I think that in order to obtain some of the things that the neighborhoods want, that we should be leaning toward approving this in order to get to make sure that the times when the signs go out can be included in this variance rather than having them not go through with this and not go through the variance process. So I just want to thank both sides for working together and thank staff for reaching this compromise.
Well said. Well said. Any other comments by the board members? Any questions of staff that you may have? Tom, I assume that you're in the background there.
Mr. Chair, I am. I can comment on anything you'd like me to.
Would you like to comment on the temperature of those signs, whether it be 4,400 or 3,000 or 10?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can. What my comment would be is throughout this whole process, I've seen examples in the immediate area, La Encantada, the northeast, the southeast, the southwest corners of Campbell and Skyline. We've seen examples of halo illuminated signs that seem to be aesthetic. They seem to integrate well into the community. They seem to look, really nice. All of those signs are subject to our outdoor lighting code and the 4,400, temperature. So I'm not supportive. In my recommendation, I would not recommend going down to the lower color temperature. The only effect is going to have is the reddening, making the sign appear more red, which I'm not sure from an aesthetic perspective is exactly what we want in this area. What I do agree with Mr. Call's comments is the intensity of the sign, and I talked to the building official, and I'm not 100% sure on what can be added. The only couple things that I came up with is requiring a non-white color for the letters, or potentially requiring the letters on the freestanding sign to be halo illuminated also, which would reduce that intensity. I'm not sure, given the scope of the request, that necessarily should be imposed. When you look at the signs, the sign along Orange, or the sign along Skyline, pretty much the only reason the variance is needed is for the logo and that, the pop out on the top. And so I'm not sure there's a way to further limit it. I know the building official and the outdoor lighting code are considering ways to regulate signs in their outdoor lighting code update, which is proceeding. Probably won't be done for another year or so. But other than counting the signs as part of their total lumen output for the site, I'm not really sure of other regulations to apply. I mean, I gave you my two examples. You could make them do a maybe darker color. You could make them do halo illuminated on the freestanding signs. I'm not sure that solves it or makes it any better from an aesthetic perspective.
Probably not. Do you have any comments? One of the respondents was Fred, and he had mentioned a whole bunch of stuff about the dark sky, and I appreciate his comments, and it's something well to take into account. Do you have any comments about your interpretation, Tom, of the dark sky and this at this stage of the game?
Sure, Mr. Chair, board members. I respect Fred's opinion. I think the way I tried to craft my recommendation was to allow what's allowed by the outdoor lighting code, but have the reduction in the time, which will have the signs extinguished earlier than they would be normally. And I think that would be, beneficial to the dark sky community and ultimately to the neighbors. I think the reason I went with the 9 o'clock on the building and 10 o'clock on the freestanding sign is, again, the height of the signs on the building are higher, probably visible from a further area. So ultimately, those should be extinguished earlier and allow the freestanding signs, which probably cannot be visible from residences, to stay on till 10 o'clock, which is will still be off an hour earlier than the outdoor lighting code would allow.
Yes, having been to that area both day and night, I can attest to what you just said.
And Mr. Chair, I think the main reason I didn't recommend the color temperature is because in this immediate area, almost every sign is halo illuminated letters, including La Encantada and all the other corners there. And I think uniformity might be the better option in regards to the color than the reduced color temperature, which may make this sign stick out more and not really integrate as well. So I think those were my reasons for the way I recommended it.
Well, your conditions of approval certainly are well-founded and well thought out, at least in my opinion.
Well, I appreciate that, Chair. I can't say they're the best or the right, but I did spend a lot of time trying to maximize the most benefit for everyone. And I think that's where I came up with the lower, the earlier time, and then ultimately the reduction in the letters on the building, trying to, maximize the benefit for all sides.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Mr. Call, I know that you have considerable knowledge on this type of thing based upon your background and experience. I would ask that you make a motion to either approve or disapprove using the approval conditions that Tom had put out. If you can word that in so many words, you're good at that.
You're sweet talking me there, Lynn.
Either to approve or disapprove.
Okay. I would first comment that I think for the small monument signs, I don't think I'm a fan of the halo lighted approach, and so I think I would move to approve the variance with the conditions. Well, let me be more formal here. I move to approve P21VA00010 Catalina Fieldhills Church, PCA, East Orange Grove Road, the variance request, including the conditions of the staff, and I would pose one other condition, and that is that the LED lights on the freestanding signs be dimmable so as to be able to address if there is a comfort level issue.
Okay, so it has been moved.
Second.
We need a second on that that it has been moved to approve with the conditions as presented by staff, with the addition of number 8 for LED, dimmable LED on the freestandings. Is that correct, Bruce?
That's correct.
Do I have a second on that?
I second.
Mr. Carroll, seconded?
Yes.
Very good. It's been moved and approved with the conditions as requested by staff on his December 3rd notification with the addition of number 8 for an dimmable LEDs on the freestandings. All right, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Chairman?
The motion has been made.
Yes. Is a normal rule that you have a brief discussion on that before voting, unless you want to call a question?
I will call a question.
The discussion has taken place already, where the motion's been made, and now it's just a vote on it.
You've actually had your chance to make a statement.
Okay. So there's a new aspect, which is the dimmable LED in the box signs, and the question is there any process by which that dimming is actually invoked? Is there a goal of hitting a NITS output on the signs? Will it be a response to neighborhood complaints? In other words, if we ask them to put on the dimmers, what then happens?
Well, if you're going to have a situation where you're asking the county or some organization to enforce or apply circumstances or requirements to dim it, you're asking for enforcement, and that is beyond the scope of this board. So I think if there's a dimmer, that is left to the judgment of the church to choose when to use the dimmer.
When and how to use it. So the mere fact that we're putting that number 8 on there with the LED, that's part of the approval aspect of the motion that has been made. So at this point in time, I will call for a roll call vote on the approval as stated by Mr. Call.
Carroll?
Approve.
Call?
Approve.
Green?
Approve.
Maslin?
Approve.
And Wildblood?
Approve.
And Mr. Chair, this is Tom Trzaskowski. If there's an issue that arises with the intensity, if the pastor is hearing issues and wants me to evaluate it from almost an impartial third party, I can provide my feedback to him if that's what he wants.
Very good.
It makes it a very simple thing. Yeah, it makes it a very simple thing to be able to address it if the dimmability function is there, and so if you have complaints about it being just too intense, it's solvable with that setting. So I think that I applaud the approach that has been taken by everybody concerned to try and make sure that this is going to be a good solution for the neighborhood.
This is Board Carroll. I agree with Mr. Call's assessment. I think the dimmer on there will give an option if the church hears some complaints. But I want to be clear that this is not going to be a tool to seek enforcement. I mean, that's beyond the scope of this variance. But it will give them the ability to adjust according to input from the neighbors.
And this is Mr. Wildblood. Yes, I agree. And also, Mr. Call, your addition to that LED dimmer, what would be condition number 8 is perfect. So, right, it has been approved. So now I guess we need a motion to close this hearing.
Well, Chairman Wildblood, a quick question for Tom. Since we have a continuance that we have, so I assume we have the one case next month. Tom, are there any other cases that we know of that are going to be before us next month?
Lauren, can you help me? Do we have any others?
Yes, we have 2 other cases, and they're both about detached garages.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Can I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I move to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor of adjournment? say aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you next month.
Have a great holiday, guys. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.